And in today's episode, among other things, you'll see a Harvard scientist claims that reversing human aging is already possible. In addition, we will also see the million-dollar race to create the brain of machines, a Chinese battery that practically eliminates the risk of fires, humanoid robots that are already learning to walk in our real world, and a Brazilian breakthrough that could completely change the future of transplants. Let's understand all of this and a bit more about some technologies. Let's go! Hello everyone, I'm Realidade Impressionante, and you're watching Realidade Impressionante. During a recent interview for a foreign podcast, which translated into Portuguese would be Diary of a Show, the scientist David Sinclair made a statement that could really completely change the way we see aging. According to him, the biggest limit of our lives may not be time, but rather a biological error that science is only now beginning to understand. Aging has always been treated as something inevitable, a natural process of our bodies, a straight line that starts at birth and ends in decline. But throughout the interview, Sinclair emphasizes that this view might be completely wrong. He proposes a theory that treats aging not as fate, but as a failure, a loss of biological information. According to what he explains in the podcast, your body and mind work like a highly organized system, where each cell knows exactly what it does, how to behave, and when to act, like an extremely precise software. But as time goes by, this organization starts to break down. Not because the body simply wears out, but because it starts failing to read these instructions. If this is proven, it completely changes the game. Because as Sinclair himself pointed out during the interview, if aging is losing information, then, in theory, it's possible to recover that information like a kind of backup, as if there were a younger version of your body stored at some biological level, ready to be accessed again. And the most impressive thing is that this has already started to move beyond the theoretical stage. Throughout the conversation, he mentions experiments in which scientists managed to reprogram adult cells, making them return to a younger state without losing their identity. And in one of the most impactful experiments he mentioned, a technique was applied to eye tissues, reversing damage and restoring vision in some specific cases of blindness. Okay, just to be clear, we're not talking about slowing down aging, we're talking about reversal. And while these advances are still in the early stages in humans, Sinclair makes it clear throughout the podcast that the first tests have already begun, paving the way for something that until recently seemed impossible, something straight out of fiction. But there's a point that he emphasizes several times throughout the interview, and it completely changes the way you and I see all of this. This reprogramming doesn't depend solely on advanced technologies. Our own bodies already have mechanisms capable of slowing down and even reversing aging. The problem is that this modern lifestyle we have here might be doing exactly the opposite. During the podcast, he explains that eating all the time, avoiding discomfort, and eliminating any kind of stress might be shutting down essential biological systems. And this leads to an idea that seems counterintuitive. Certain types of stress are necessary. Fasting, exposure to cold, intense heat, and physical exercise work as biological signals that tell our body it needs to adapt in order to survive and become more efficient. These stimuli, according to the scientist, activate ancient survival mechanisms that help preserve and repair our body. And this connects directly with another important statement made by Sinclair during the interview. Your DNA is not your destiny. For decades, it was believed that genes determined everything. But epigenetics is showing that the environment, habits, and even small choices in our daily lives can directly influence how these genes will behave. This means that our body is not a fixed system. It is adaptable. And perhaps the most impactful point of all this, as he himself suggests throughout the conversation, is the following. If aging can be reversed, then many of the diseases we know today could indeed cease to exist in the way they exist today. Cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and even problems related to infertility are deeply connected to the aging of the body. By attacking the root of the process, we're not just treating the symptoms, but we're changing the foundation of the problem. But of course, this raises a question that goes beyond science. And this part, my friends, even though it's not technical, is implied at several moments during the interview. If living longer becomes something common, what happens to the value of time? What happens to purpose? Is humanity really prepared to live decades longer in good health? Or are we advancing too fast, much faster than we can comprehend? Because in the end, maybe the most important question isn't how long we can live, but what it really means to live when time is no longer a limit for us. And while science begins to question the limits of the human body itself, another silent race is happening outside of it. A competition that doesn't just involve age or biology, but something much more fundamental for the future of humanity: energy. Tesla has made a move that transforms the search for lithium. The company brought online at the beginning of 2026 a gigantic refinery in Texas with an investment of approximately $1 billion, thus marking a turning point in the way North America is dealing with energy. But what really makes this facility different is not just its size, its control. For decades, most lithium refining was concentrated in Asia, creating a silent global dependence where countries extract the ore but need to send it to another continent before it can be used. Now that's starting to change. Tesla's new refinery is designed to produce battery-grade lithium hydroxide in an amount that's enough to supply about 1 million electric vehicles per year. And this isn't just about production, it's about independence. And there's a detail that's even more interesting. The process used there is completely different from the traditional model. While most refineries use sulfuric acid, generating toxic waste and significant environmental impacts, Tesla has implemented a method called alkaline leaching, which is completely acid-free. In practice, this eliminates dangerous byproducts and turns the main waste into a sand-like material, which can be used in concrete production, for example. In other words, what used to be just industrial waste now becomes raw material. And this reveals something much bigger. It's not just about producing clean energy, but about redesigning this entire production chain. Furthermore, by refining lithium directly in the United States, Tesla drastically reduces the need for intercontinental transportation, shortening this material's journey by tens of thousands of kilometers. And less transportation means fewer emissions, more efficiency, and more strategic control. And that control is exactly the main point, because whoever dominates refining also dominates access. And whoever controls access controls scale. But producing energy is only part of the problem, a risk that has accompanied this revolution from the very beginning, from way back, and that still worries the industry today. What happens when these batteries fail? Let's get into that now. Researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences have just presented a solution that could completely change the so-called thermal runaway, a new sodium battery that is, quote, able to protect itself. During testing, this battery withstood temperatures of up to 300 degrees Celsius without catching fire, exploding, or collapsing. And this happens because of a mechanism that until recently simply didn't exist. It's a kind of internal smart firewall. Unlike traditional batteries that rely on external structures to contain failures, this new technology creates a barrier inside the cell itself at the exact moment the risk appears. When the temperature goes beyond a certain limit, the liquid electrolyte inside the battery undergoes a transformation that prevents fire. It solidifies. It forms a physical layer that blocks the spread of heat. In practice, this stops the chain reaction before it gets out of control, because that's exactly how thermal runaway happens. Heat generates more heat, which generates even more heat in a cycle that quickly accelerates until it causes fires or explosions. But with this new technology, this cycle is simply broken. The battery protects itself, and this detail changes everything. In safety tests, including nail penetration, which is used to simulate internal failures, the cell remained stable. No runaway, no fire, and no explosions. And the most interesting thing is that this extra safety doesn't compromise performance. The battery still achieves competitive levels of energy density and works across a wide temperature range, from extremely cold environments to intense heat conditions. This opens up possibilities for applications where risk has always been a problem. Electric vehicles, heavy trucks, large-scale energy storage. But there's an even more strategic perspective behind all of this. Because while the world is discussing battery life, range, and charging speed, China is targeting a much more fundamental point, which is the safety of these batteries. And whoever solves this problem first not only gains a technological advantage, but also earns trust. And in a market that depends directly on risk perception, that can be decisive. And as storing energy becomes safer and more efficient, the machines that will use these batteries are starting to hit the streets, you see. And the company P&D Robotics recently released new images of its humanoid robot called Atom. What appears in these videos here marks a very important milestone for the entire industry. The robot is not just operating in controlled environments, it is now dealing with the real world. Irregular stairs, urban spaces, terrain variations, and a lot of unpredictability. And the most impressive thing is not just the fact that it can climb these stairs, it's how it does it. Smoothly adapting as it goes, and without external support. But to understand the significance of all this, we need to go back a little in time. In the early stages, Adam was tested in the lab and in much simpler settings, often without a head attached to safety systems while he was learning to balance. This process, known as scene to real, is one of the biggest challenges in modern robotics. Because teaching a robot in simulation is one thing, making it work in the real world is something completely different. And that's exactly the barrier that's being broken. Now, Adam is already able to navigate real urban environments without any assistance, dealing with small imperfections that might go unnoticed by a human. But for a machine, it represents quite a big challenge. And a significant part of this revolution comes from a system called CLOT. This is a real-time motion tracking model that allows the robot to continuously adjust its actions based on the environment. In practice, this creates a constant feedback loop where the robot observes, corrects, and adapts in fractions of a second. And of course, when this happens on a large scale, the impact won't be just technological. It will be economic. It will be social and perhaps irreversible. But making a robot walk is just the beginning. Because the real challenge isn't in the machine's body. It's in the mind that controls that body. Let's understand this now. And UBTech Robotics is offering up to $18 million a year to hire a single professional, a chief scientist of embodied intelligence, an amount that until recently was reserved only for artificial intelligence giants over there in Silicon Valley. But now it's being directed toward a new goal, creating the brains of humanoid robots. And this reveals a profound change. For years, robotics was dominated by hardware, motors, joints, sensors, but now their focus has completely changed. The real difference is no longer in the body of the machine. It's in the intelligence that controls that body. And this new position within UBTech has a very clear mission: to develop systems capable of uniting vision, language, and action in a single workflow. In other words, to create robots that not only see the environment, but also understand commands and carry out tasks with complete autonomy. In practice, this means moving away from programmed machines and entering a scenario where the machines interpret, make decisions, and learn from their own environment. This is directly related to a concept that has been gaining a lot of traction now in 2026, the so-called physical AI. This is the revolution of artificial intelligence, which will no longer exist only on screens and will start acting in our real world. And it will do this, of course, by manipulating objects, interacting with people, and performing complex tasks. All of this explains the company's aggressive move, because it's not just about building robots. It's about mastering the system that controls these robots. And at the center of this relationship is exactly what UBTech is trying to buy: intelligence. And when this intelligence starts to evolve, a new question inevitably arises, one I can't help but ask. How long until this leaves the factories and actually gets into people's hands? In other words, into our homes? The answer is in this next report we're about to see now. Let's go. And robots are no longer exclusive to laboratories and factories. They're really reaching the end consumer now. They're being sold online through AliExpress with a starting price of about $4,900. Unitrix Robotics is about to launch, or may have already launched by the time I'm recording this video, its new humanoid robot on the global market with a price that completely changes the rules of the game. The new model, called R1, was designed to be affordable, compact, and surprisingly capable. Standing a little over 1.20 meters tall, weighing about 25 kilograms and with dozens of degrees of freedom, it can perform complex movements, including running and even acrobatics. But the most important thing isn't what it can do today, it's what it represents. Because by putting a functional humanoid robot on a global marketplace, Unitrix isn't just selling a product. It's creating an ecosystem. Researchers, developers, and even enthusiasts can now have access to a real robotics platform for a fraction of the traditional cost. And that speeds everything up. More people experimenting means more ideas. More ideas mean more evolution. And more evolution means that this technology will advance at a speed that maybe not even the companies themselves can predict. And the numbers show that this is already happening. While Western companies are still producing humanoids in limited volumes, Unitrix has already shipped thousands of units in a single year. And now, by opening its doors to the global market, it can scale this up in an even more aggressive way. And as machines start to move closer and closer into our homes and toward human-like behavior, another frontier begins to be crossed, not by machines but by biology itself. Let's get into that now. And while much of the world is racing to build smarter machines, another silent revolution is happening inside laboratories. A revolution that could redefine life itself. Researchers from USP here at the University of São Paulo announced an unprecedented milestone here in Brazil. The birth of the first cloned pig in our country, a healthy animal weighing about 2.5 kilos, representing more than a technical breakthrough. It could be the beginning of a new era in medicine, because behind this experiment there is a much greater goal: to produce organs compatible with the human body. For decades, the idea of using animal organs in transplants ran into an almost insurmountable problem: immediate rejection by the human body. But that started to change recently, and scientists managed to identify the specific genes responsible for causing this rejection. And they learned how to deactivate them. And it didn't stop there. Besides removing these genes, researchers also started inserting human genes into animal embryos, significantly increasing compatibility between the species. In practice, this means making an animal's biology much more similar to human biology at a biological level. But getting here wasn't simple. Mastering genetic modification was just the first step. The real challenge came afterward: cloning these animals efficiently. The success rate of this type of process is still extremely low, often between 1% and 5%. And even so, after several attempts and technical adjustments, the Brazilian team managed to carry a pregnancy to term. And this completely changes the scenario, because now, the next step is already defined: to clone genetically modified pigs and start studies directly aimed at transplants in human beings. And that's it. If you like this episode, you know what to do, right? Leave a like and make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for staying with me. See you next time. Just click one of the 2 suggestions on your screen. Thank you so much, all right? Thanks, and bye-bye. See you in the next one. Click one, I'm waiting for you, okay?